The Volga River. Wide. Frozen. Silent. Smoke drifts over a shattered horizon. What was once a proud city, now lies in ruins. Factories burned. Homes gone. Children buried beneath the rubble. This is Stalingrad. Winter 1942. A city under siege. A people on the brink of annihilation. And yet, they refused to surrender. For Hitler, this city was more than a name. It was a challenge. A symbol. To crush Stalingrad was to crush Stalin himself. To strike at the very heart of the Soviet will. But Stalin had already given his command. Not one step back. Those words became law. Retreat was death. Surrender unthinkable. The Luftwaffe came first. Thousands of bombs. 2 days of fire and fury. The city burned, and the Volga glowed red in the night. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained but rubble and resolve. Men, women, children, all became soldiers. All became defenders. We shall fight for every street, every house, every step, vowed the Soviet commanders. And so began one of the greatest struggles in human history. A battle not just for a city, but for the soul of a nation. Stalingrad. The city that refused to die. Summer 1942. The Eastern Front stretches for thousands of miles, from the Arctic Circle to the Caucasus Mountains. For over a year, the German war machine had pushed deep into Soviet territory. Smolensk, Kiev, Kharkov. Each city, conquered. Each victory, feeding Hitler's belief that he was unstoppable. But there was one thing Germany still needed. Oil. Pause, sound of distant aircraft. The factories of the Reich were hungry. The panzers that once rolled across Europe now sat idle without fuel. To the south lay the Caucasus, and the oil fields of Baku. Hitler's new plan was born, Operation Blue. Destroy the Red Army. Seize the oil. Cripple the Soviet heart. But between the German army and that oil lay a city on the Volga. A city that commanded the river lifeline to the north. Stalingrad. Tense brass music rises. At first, it wasn't the main target. But as the campaign dragged on, Hitler's obsession grew. He looked at the map, saw Stalin's name, and smiled. "We will take Stalingrad," he said, "and the world will tremble." From that moment, the war changed. The attack on the oil fields became a war for a name, for pride, for ego. And so the armies turned east, toward a city already choking under the summer dust. What Hitler saw as a symbol to destroy, Stalin saw as a fortress to defend. Neither man would yield. And between them, an entire city would burn. August 1942. The German Sixth Army, 250,000 strong, advances towards Stalingrad. Led by General Friedrich Paulus, a man known more for precision than passion. His orders are clear. Take the city. Wipe it from the map. Above, the Luftwaffe circles like vultures. On August 23rd, the sky turns black. More than 1,000 bombers descend upon Stalingrad. Sound of bombs whistling, explosions, flames crackling. Within hours, the city of 500,000 becomes a furnace. Wood, steel, and flesh, all consumed by fire. Entire families vanish beneath collapsing walls. An eyewitness would later write, "The sky was red for 3 days. The air itself burned." But Hitler rejoiced. He believed Stalingrad would fall within days. He couldn't have been more wrong. For across the Volga, hidden among the smoke, waited the defenders, the 62nd Army, led by General Vasily Chukov. They were farmers, students, workers, men with almost no food, no ammunition, but one order. Not one step back. Soft, defiant music rises. As the Germans advance through the ruins, the Soviets turned every street, every building, every basement into a fortress. A single apartment block could cost 100 lives. A railway station could change hands 10 times in one day. The Germans called it Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. A nightmare of rubble, blood, and fear. The mighty Blitzkrieg, built for speed and open plains, was now crawling through a maze of death. And for the first time in the war, the hunters became the hunted. By September 1942, Stalingrad no longer resembled a city. It was a skeleton, broken, burning, and buried under ash. Every building was a fortress. Every basement, a bunker. And every street, a graveyard. General Chekhov's men held on by their fingernails. They fought for factories, for staircases, for single rooms. At the Red October factory, Soviet soldiers fought with hammers and shovels. When their rifles broke, they used their fists. When bullets ran out, they threw bricks. We fought for every meter, one Soviet veteran recalled. If I took one step forward, I knew I might not take another. The Germans were stunned. They had captured half of Europe, but never faced this. Hitler demanded victory. Paulus demanded reinforcements. Neither realized the city itself was devouring both armies. The Luftwaffe still ruled the skies. But they could no longer tell friend from foe. The front line was so close. Sometimes only the width of a single wall. German soldiers nicknamed the central square the meat grinder. Bodies froze where they fell. And the snow turned red beneath the tanks. In the darkness, Soviet snipers stalked the ruins. Names like Vasily Zaitsev, who became a legend. He once whispered, "For us, there is no land beyond the Volga." Soft echo of a rifle shot, then silence. Both sides were trapped now. There was no retreat. No mercy. No air to breathe through the smoke. Stalingrad had become something beyond war. It was a test of endurance, of madness, and of will. Encirclement, the trap springs on the Sixth Army. By November 1942, the unthinkable was about to happen. The hunters were about to become the hunted. For months, Hitler's Sixth Army had fought deep inside the ruins of Stalingrad. Paulus believed victory was near. But far beyond the city, the Red Army was preparing something devastating. It was called Operation Uranus. A name chosen not for glory, but for destruction. On November 19th, before dawn, Soviet artillery opened up with a roar that shook the earth. 1,000 guns thundered across the steppe. And in minutes the German flanks were ripped apart. But here's the crucial detail. The flanks weren't held by elite German troops. They were manned by Romanian and Italian divisions. Poorly equipped, exhausted, and frozen. They broke under the assault. The Soviets poured through the gaps like a tidal wave. Within 4 days the trap snapped shut. The entire Sixth Army, more than 300,000 men, was surrounded inside Stalingrad. Paulus radioed Berlin. "We are encircled. Supplies low. Request permission to break out." Hitler's reply was cold, absolute. "Stand fast. Stalingrad will be held at all costs." The Luftwaffe promised to supply the army by air. But it was a lie born from arrogance. The snowstorms, the Soviet anti-aircraft guns, and the sheer scale of the encirclement made it impossible. Inside the pocket, the Kessel, men began to freeze and starve. Bread rations fell to a few ounces. Horse meat became a luxury. One German officer wrote in his diary, "The snow covers our dead like a blanket. The living envy them." The Sixth Army, once the pride of Hitler's Reich, was now a ghost, trapped inside its own victory. The frozen hell, life inside the Kessel. December 1942. The German Sixth Army, once 300,000 strong, was dying in silence. They called it Der Kessel, the cauldron. A fitting name for a place where men melted into ghosts. Temperatures plunged to -30 degrees Celsius. Rifles froze. Fuel turned to jelly. Even the dead, too many to bury, froze standing, like grim statues of defeat. Every day, Soviet artillery pounded the city. Every night the sky burned red from the bombardment. The airfields, Potomac and Gumrak, became the last fragile lifelines to the outside world. Luftwaffe planes struggled through blizzards, bringing just a fraction of the food and ammunition needed. One day, 20 tons of supplies arrived. They needed 600. Inside the ruins, men ate whatever they could find. Frozen horses, dead dogs, even wallpaper boiled for glue. A soldier wrote in his diary, "We are animals now. We eat to live one more hour." No one believes in rescue anymore. Yet still they fought. Street by street. House by house. Because surrender, by Hitler's decree, was forbidden. Some whispered that they were already dead. Others prayed for a bullet to end the waiting. A young medic later recalled, "The wounded begged us not for morphine, but for bread." This is Sixth Army, holding, still holding. But everyone knew the walls were closing in. The Soviets had turned Stalingrad into a tomb. And soon the world would see what blind obedience truly cost. The desperate rescue that failed. December 12, 1942. South of Stalingrad, the steppe trembled. Field Marshal Erich von Milstein had launched Operation Winter Storm, Germany's last desperate gamble to save the Sixth Army. His armored spearhead, led by the 4th Panzer Army, smashed through Soviet lines with brutal precision. For a moment, hope flickered in the Kessel. The radio crackled with disbelief. Relief is coming. Hold fast. Inside Stalingrad, starving soldiers gathered around broken receivers, clutching onto that single word, hope. They could hear the faint rumble of artillery miles away, like thunder calling from salvation itself. But the Soviets were waiting. Marshal Zhukov had anticipated the move. He unleashed Operation Little Saturn, striking the German flanks, manned by under-equipped Italian and Romanian units. They collapsed. Entire divisions were swallowed by the snow. Milstein's relief force, just 30 miles from Stalingrad, was forced to retreat or face annihilation. Inside the pocket, General Friedrich Paulus begged for permission to break out. He radioed Hitler. "If we do not move now, the army will perish." The reply came cold and final. "Stand fast. Stalingrad must be held." And with that, the last chance to save the Sixth Army vanished into the winter wind. When Milstein learned the order, he whispered to an aide, "Then they are all dead men." By Christmas, the soldiers of Stalingrad lit fires made from wooden rifle stocks. They sang hymns to drown out the sound of the dying. For them, winter storm had come. But the thaw of rescue never would. The collapse, inside the final days of the Sixth Army. January 1943. Stalingrad, once a city, had become a graveyard made of ice and steel. The temperature dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. And the men of the Sixth Army were dying faster than bullets could fall. Their rations had run out weeks ago. A daily meal now meant a slice of frozen horse meat. If you were lucky. The Luftwaffe's promised air supply was a cruel joke. Planes fell from the sky before they reached the pocket, shot down or grounded by the blizzards. Corpses lay piled like barricades. Soldiers used them as walls against the wind. Frostbite blackened hands, and men cut the boots off the dead just to keep their own feet from freezing. Letters home were short and broken. No food. No medicine. Only snow and silence. In the basements of shattered buildings, German medics worked by candlelight. No morphine, no bandages. Just strips of torn uniforms soaked in alcohol. General Paulus tried to maintain discipline. But the truth was clear. His once proud army, 300,000 strong, was now a ghost force of 90,000 starving men. Every night they listened for engines in the distance, hoping for rescue, hearing only the endless rumble of Soviet artillery. The Red Army was closing in from every direction. And still, Hitler's orders remained. No surrender. But inside the ruins of Stalingrad, the men had stopped fighting for the Führer. They fought only for warmth. For one more day of breath. For the chance to see the sun rise again. Surrender at Stalingrad, the day the German Empire died. January 31, 1943. The city that once bore Stalin's name was silent. Smoke drifted over shattered streets. And from the ruins emerged the last soldiers of the German Sixth Army. Gaunt, trembling, eyes hollowed by hunger and defeat. Inside a cold basement on the western bank of the Volga, Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, once one of Hitler's most disciplined commanders, stood waiting for Soviet officers to arrive. His uniform was immaculate, his face pale as ash. He had received a message from Hitler that morning. You will fight to the last bullet. No surrender. But there were no bullets left. No food. No army to command. When Soviet Major General Ivan Laskin entered the room, Paulus offered a faint nod and said softly, "The fighting has stopped." With those 4 words, Germany's dream of conquest in the East died. Across the ruins of Stalingrad, tens of thousands of German troops laid down their weapons. Some wept. Others simply sat in the snow, staring at nothing. Out of nearly 300,000 men, only 91,000 were taken prisoner. Of those, just 5,000 would ever return home. The once invincible Wehrmacht, Broken. The myth of Nazi supremacy shattered in the frozen streets of Stalingrad. As Soviet soldiers raised their red flag over the ruins, a message reached Berlin. Hitler's aide whispered the words he feared most. "My Führer, Stalingrad has fallen." And in that moment, the world knew. The tide of the Second World War had turned forever. The price of Stalingrad and its global impact. When the Battle of Stalingrad finally ended on February 2, 1943, the war in Europe had fundamentally changed. The German Sixth Army was destroyed, over 90,000 soldiers marched into Soviet captivity, and only a few thousand would ever return home. The once proud Wehrmacht, which had swept across Europe in a tide of conquest, now stood bloodied and broken on the Eastern Front. Stalingrad was not just a military defeat, it was a psychological catastrophe for Germany. The myth of Nazi invincibility collapsed. Across occupied Europe, people whispered that Hitler could be beaten. In Berlin, mourning was mixed with disbelief. The Führer's word, once law, was now questioned in silence. For the Soviet Union, Stalingrad became a turning point, a symbol of endurance, unity, and sacrifice. More than 1 million Soviet soldiers and civilians perished in the battle. The city itself was reduced to rubble, yet it stood as proof that German expansion could be stopped. The Red Army, once on the defensive, now prepared to push westward. From this moment onward, the initiative of the war shifted irrevocably toward the Allies. The battle also reshaped global strategy. The Western Allies saw that Germany was vulnerable and accelerated plans for a second front in Europe. Stalingrad inspired resistance movements from France to Yugoslavia, becoming a rallying cry for liberation. But beyond the military and political consequences lay a deeper human cost. Entire families were erased, generations scarred, and a city turned into a monument of suffering. The ruins of Stalingrad stood as silent witnesses to the brutality of total war, and a reminder that victory in such a conflict came only through unimaginable sacrifice.